another amazing day at fmtraining.tv. My name is Margaret. I'll be your broadcasting engineer for today. I'm here with the wonderful Calvin Mosiman, who is a fantastic senior engineer who we're very lucky to have back on the show to discuss awesome topics with us. Real quick, let's discuss our live training schedule. Load, here we go. So today we've got ExecuteSQL and FileMaker for beginners with Calvin, which will be really quite interesting. We get questions about this on a fairly regular basis, so it'll be fun to have this recapped. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we'll continue the UI UX for advanced developers Nick adventures. I believe we are doing good-looking layouts, in Nick's quotation, over the next 3 days, so custom layout objects and all that jazz. Next we'll talk about that. Friday, we're starting kind of an open permanent Q&A. For the foreseeable future. It's going to be mostly an open Q&A with usually Richard and probably Jacob most Fridays going forward. Open Q&A about the Claris platform stuff, because that should be being updated pretty regularly. And also about general FileMaker questions, if you happen to have them. And then next Monday, next week after that will be a little interesting. So that'll be broken up in interesting ways. But next Monday, Nick will resume another part of his section, sort functions. Or rather, very pretty looking sort functions. With that being said, if you'd like to support the channel, we would appreciate if you get the FM Training Annual Subscription Bundle. It has 100+ hours of really high energy video training. Richard's a presenter, Calvin here is a presenter, Jonathan Ray, Nick, Jacob Taylor, all people that you're very familiar with. They pretty much cover all the topics under the sun. If you would like to support us, feel free to grab it. We'd greatly appreciate it, and you get a ton of training in exchange. That being said, I think I am done. Calvin, what are we doing today?
Well, thanks for listening today. We are looking at the ExecuteSQL function, and we'll be exploring and introducing you to this, and going over some of the use cases for it. And if we, depending on how much time it takes, we will move from our demo into some other files where it's used in FM starting point, other sample files we've used to do reporting and such. And so some really powerful things with ExecuteSQL function. I gave Margaret 3 download links, so there should be some download links for the ExecuteSQL demo file for our chart demo, and also FM starting point, which uses this function as well. So you should get those and be able to download them and kind of follow along while I show you this. Let me go ahead and share my screen, and we will jump in. And feel free to jump in with questions as they come up. So here I have this real simple demo file. We have a place where we can type in our SQL query, and we get the results at the bottom of the screen. And we get those results by selecting the Run button. So let's go ahead and just, before we select Run, let's just look at the script that is behind Run. That's this ExecuteSQL. And all it is setting a variable with the ExecuteSQL function. Let's go ahead and open this. And it's processing that query that we gave it in the field, and we're not specifying anything for the field or row separators. So really bare bones, just so we can get used to it. So one thing that's the SQL query, or the ExecuteSQL function, is limited to only one kind of SQL statement, and that's the select statement. So your statement's going to have a select in it. So here we have select, and then we have star, and that's just like a wild to grab everything from the table. If you try this out on one of your tables, just be careful, because if you have summary fields or it's a huge data set, or you're working with something on the server, it could just bog everything down. But in this case, we're local. We have only 500 records, so this should work pretty fast. And we're pulling from the names table. So let's go ahead and look at our database. So in our database definitions, we got names, SQL queries, that's where we're working, invoices, and staff. And those are all, our data sets are in these 3 tables, and then SQL queries is where we are setting those up. You'll notice in our relationships, there's no relationships. There's no relationships, which is one of the powerful things about the ExecuteSQL is that it doesn't require relationships. You can create the relationships right there in the function. So let's go ahead and say run. Now we'll notice here, let's make this a little wider. Can everyone see that okay?
Yes, I think we're good.
Okay, you'll notice that each record is a row. And we've got the names here. We've got the person's name, the company, the address, city, state, zip code, phone number. And you can kind of look through there and figure out what's going on. This must be an ID, maybe another ID. And we see, we can scroll through all this. We're just grabbing all of those fields from that table. And so real basic. So sometimes that we start with something that's most general, and then we'll work it, we'll narrow it down. So let's go to our next demo. So here, the first one you'll notice we're just selecting everything. That star is just a wild, select everything from names. Next, we're saying select first name and last name from names. Where, let's remove the where. So right now we're just going to select first name, last name from names. Let's go ahead and run. So now instead of grabbing all the fields, we are grabbing just 2 fields. And we can scroll through and there should be about 500 records there. And so that grabbed them all. And additionally, we can add to that a where. So the where is like a find in FileMaker. So we're saying where the field state equals CA. We'll say run again. And now our list has been narrowed down. Our query is now just names from the state of California. So a nice additional narrowing to that list. Now you'll notice here in all these demos I've showed so far, we have a comma separator. And in FileMaker, between the data, between the fields, and a return separator between the records. But you can change that. So let me go ahead and show you how we can change that. If we open scripts, we've got 2 options here after the ExecuteSQL, or after the SQL query. We've got a field separator and a row separator. I'm going to just change the field separator to a bar. Let's go ahead and save this. We'll close out and run. And now you'll notice that instead of a comma, we have a bar between each of those fields. And we can do the same with return. We'll leave the return between the records because it's easier to see that way. Let's continue moving forward. So here is, you'll notice that as we go, we're getting more and more complicated with these finds and these queries and these select statements. And as we continue, as you get more complicated, it's going to take more time. And sometimes you get to a point where it might take so long to run the query that it's not really feasible to use ExecuteSQL, and you might want to find another method. So here we're grabbing first name, last name, and this is really cool. We're grabbing a total. And this is the invoice total, and we're summarizing in the statement. So here we've got names. We've got the first and last name from names. And then we're creating a join. A join is like a relationship. So we're saying join invoices to names on ID name equals ID name. And then we have a where in there where state equals California. Then we're saying group by last name, first name, and sort in ascending order. So you'll notice here, this isn't the value of one invoice, unless maybe there is one invoice. It's a value of all of Alyssa's invoices, 23,000. All of Angelo's invoices, 3,800. Now, if we remove the, I'm going to leave I don't want to, let me see if I can remove the group by and see if that breaks it. That does break it. So here I want to mess around with it, but I don't want to lose what I have. So I'm just going to say duplicate. I put it at the end. So what I'm going to change here is I'm going to remove the sum, because the sum, the sum does need to be grouped. And I'm going to remove the group. Now I'm going to say run. Now you will see here, we've got 3 records for Alyssa. 3 records for Alyssa that for that invoice. And when we jump over, I'm going to say new window. Oh, well, let's just jump back to our record. So when we go here and say run, here it's grouping those and summarizing. So another powerful thing that ExecuteSQL can do is create these values, these summarizations without a summary field, without an unstored calculation or anything like that in the name table. It just created that relationship. So it looked through that relationship that we created right here in this text, and then summarized that how many invoices or how much they had for invoices. And we could take this data and then create it into change it into some kind of report using a virtual list. Any number of things we can do with this data now that we have it. But it's a really powerful way of quickly creating reports and such. So the next one, let's try this one out. So this next one is doing the same thing, and we're just filtering by where the person's in California. And you'll see here we're not doing the grouping. We're just showing each person separate. Let's go ahead and say run here. So here is another join. So and just to emphasize once again, if we look at the database, we'll see there's no relationships between invoices and names. But with this, it's while in FileMaker, I've always said context is king, and the context of the layout really matters. But this is kind of one of the places where it breaks the rules, and it kind of works without context, which is really awesome. And it also can be dangerous if you have too great of select too many records or too many fields. It can slow things down. Let's look at the next one. And so here we are. I think this is just a repeat of this last one. And yeah. So here's another, maybe you want to get a list of all the emails in your people's table or names table. You can just say select email from names. So this is a really basic one. Here we're just grabbing all the email addresses. And this could be a quick way if somebody says, I need all the email addresses, or I need all the email addresses in a list. We can get them right here. And now we're only looking at one field. Usually we would want this in a comma separated list. So let's go ahead and change that. We'll just go to Manage Scripts, ExecuteSQL, and change this from a return to a comma separation. Am I moving too fast? And maybe we want a space in there too. What's that?
People are saying so far no, that you're not moving too fast.
Okay. So here now we have the comma space between each of those email addresses, and you can quickly copy them and paste them into wherever we need them. Now here's a list of, here we're looking for a total of all of the invoices across the board, where the total is greater than 1. And we just want we're just saying summarize total. And maybe this would be helpful for a dashboard saying how many sales are there total, or maybe how many sales are there today. That could be a useful thing. And we can just run this and it brings up our total right there. So we could say where invoices the total is greater than 1, and maybe where the dates equals today. And we can get that get some useful information that's really, really helpful for reviewing. Another thing that might be helpful on as you're starting up your app is often where the user that's logging in has a record in the app, maybe an accounts or users table, and their account name saved in there. We can use, instead of going, you could go to the layout, enter find mode, set account name with the current account name, and perform find. If something's found, it's found, and otherwise do something else. So here, instead of having a long script that does that, we can have this simply in a ExecuteSQL statement where we just grab the current ID for the person who's logged in. So here it's looking in the staff table for the account name and seeing if it is if there's anyone with the name admin. Now this is case sensitive, so if I change this to lowercase a, it brings back an empty result. So let's go ahead and look over at the staff. If we look over here at staff, we'll notice that we do have one person that's assigned to admin, and that's their ID. And we'll see that when we change that back to a capital and say run, those IDs match. So it's pulling that ID from the from that table, which then you could additionally use that. Sometimes I'll use the ExecuteSQL to get the person's ID and then do a query on maybe what their navigation record should be or what their privileges are, and set all of those global variables for their setup in the app. And that's just one of the use cases. Do we have any questions up to this point? We kind of went real quick through some of those.
Stu is typing. I like the idea of just people saying I like the idea of using ExecuteSQL for a startup script.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, especially if you're looking for something like this, it's going to run really fast because you're not grabbing a lot of data. Something like a summary that could take some time. We could even have that run on the server using PSOS to make it run faster. Right here, everything's local, so it runs pretty fast.
Otherwise, I think you're good.
Okay. So one thing we'll notice about all of these is that everything's kind of this is what I'm calling a sandbox here, where we can type things in and try it out and make adjustments. So here, if I change a field name and say run, I'm going to get this question mark. And the question mark means that something's wrong with the query. And so you'll notice it doesn't mean that something's not found. Previously, when we had the admin as a lowercase and we ran that, we got a result of empty. And so there's just no result there. But if the names don't match, here something's wrong because it can't find the field _ staff ID staff. So how can we go about creating these this is what we would call fragile, a fragile code, because it's not dynamic. If we change the field name, it's going to break. So if we go to the manage scripts, I've got this set variable with account ID. So this is performing the same thing that this is performing, except we're saving it in a global variable. So I'll open my data viewer, and we'll see that there's nothing currently in the data viewer, and I'll run the script. And of course it doesn't work. What's going on here? So let's go ahead and take a look and see why this didn't work. So the
live bug fixing.
Yeah. Let me try that once again. The data viewer. Okay, so now that this doesn't work, what I'm going to do is copy all of this. So copy this, and we'll paste it into the data viewer. And one thing about pasting this in, if you are using ExecuteSQL in the data viewer, just be careful that the just be careful that I wouldn't have the automatically evaluate enabled. You'd want that off because especially if there's a lot of records, then it's going to always be refreshing, and that can be problematic. So here, so I wasn't referencing my own query. That was the problem. So let me go ahead and I'm going to do one last thing here. I'm going to set a global variable with the SQL query so we can see what it actually queries. And we'll see what that looks like. So I'm going to say monitor. We'll copy all this. So instead of referencing my calculation in there, it was referencing the field. And so because the field, this field wasn't working, then the query wasn't working. So I will go ahead and run that. And now we should see when we go under current, here's the query that was run. And here is the result, the account name ID. So this is as if I'm logging in and I want to save the person's ID in a global variable. Now let's go ahead and take a look at this. Now here we see select, we see staff ID from the staff table, where staff account name equals question mark. So after, let's go ahead and look back at this. After we have the ExecuteSQL and the SQL query, we can specify the field separator and the row separator. And then after that, we can put a number of arguments. So every time that we put a question mark into our query, then the question mark is referenced by these arguments following the field and row separators. And so in this case, I'm saying get account name, and then that is putting the account name as what is being queried in the select statement. Let me go ahead and say OK. And we'll go ahead and run this. Now watch this. So this works here, and it works here. We'll say save all. So we see the account ID is working right there. Now let's go ahead and go into manage database and say somebody goes through here and decides they want to clean up the field names. They don't like what something's named. So they change the field name and they put a underscore at the beginning of the ID so that it sorts to the top. I like that personally. I'm going to say OK. Now if I go back over here and say run, I get a question mark because there's no field called ID staff anymore. It's underscore ID staff. But if I go over here and run this once again, you'll notice that it still populates the ID. And actually, maybe I should clear these. Let me go ahead and clear these and see what the results are. So, and did you know you could clear global variables in your data viewer? Something useful. Okay, so I just ran that script again. And now it dynamically, because we're using a calculation to reference that, it dynamically changed the field name and for the query. And so now the field name's changed and we got the result that we wanted for the account name. Do we have any questions about that? The difference between the fragile code that we're looking at in the sandbox and the more robust code in the script.
Questions about that, everyone? We all good? Da, da, da. I don't see anything on YouTube, Discord, no one is typing, and Twitch is dead silent for the moment. So I assume we are good until other. Oh, Lynn is typing. Got a question, Lynn? Hold on.
Okay.
What is GTFN?
That was the next thing I was going to. So the next thing I want to look at is the custom functions that make this more flexible. So let's go to File, Manage, Custom Functions. And so here, these I think I got from DevCon. So that this is a really basic function. All it is getting the field name. So we're saying get field name, and then instead of which gives you the table and the field, and then we're saying just get the second item. And then get table name is the opposite. Instead of grabbing the table field, it's grabbing the table name. And then get table field name puts them together. And you'll notice in FileMaker, it will, between the table and the field, if we select something, this isn't, you go ahead and cancel out of here. Between the table and the field, you would want a double colon like this. But in a select statement for SQL, you want a period. So if we look at the data viewer and look at this, we'll see it's quote staff, period, quote, or quote field name, or table name, quote, period, quote, field name. And so that makes it more robust as far as how we are generating that calculation to perform the query. So let's go ahead and copy. Actually, I think I already have this in my watch over here. So what's going on here is I'm using a let statement and setting a let variable with the with my query. So select and then get the table and field name, staff ID staff, from get table name. So it's just going to give the staff name, where staff account name. So get table field name for staff account name equals question mark. The question mark reference my arguments, which is get account name. And then I'm saving that in a global variable just to view it. And then we're saying execute SQL and it running it. So if I say, specified field cannot be found. So this needs to be updated. And this isn't, this was, let's go ahead and change that one too. There it is. So I thought we're in the data viewer right now, but I thought that would have changed automatically. Let's try. I'm a little surprised that didn't change. Let's say change. And it changed. Oh, it didn't change. That is really interesting. So I'm not sure. We saw that in the script it changed automatically, but for some reason I'm not seeing it change in the data viewer automatically. Anyway, so we have some other custom functions. So we'll say manage custom functions that we also use, which here it's pretty much the same, a similar feature, but we can decide whether we want it quoted or not. Field ref get field and field ref get TO. And in these both functions I'm not using in this demo, but we do use them in the FM starting point. So do we have any other questions about the sandbox before we go on to another demo file?
I'm going to let people type.
Now, just to point out while we're waiting on any questions, we have a number of resources here. The ExecuteSQL. Now, I just want to point out there's also an ExecuteSQL script step. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the function. So make sure when you look at the help that you're looking at this help, and it's started in the FileMaker 12, and you'll notice that there's a bunch of examples and interesting stuff about that. Yes.
How do you handle multiple arguments?
Like multiple arguments. So the multiple arguments. You know, I might be doing that in FM starting point. So, but the multiple arguments, just to kind of say this briefly, let's go ahead and look at that script here. I'll just duplicate this. So if you have a second argument, then let's say where let's look at this. We'll say, and maybe staff name equals, and then we'll, so here we have two parts of the where account name equals whatever we specify, and where staff name equals something else. Now, it probably doesn't make sense in this case to have it in this use case, but we're just going to show how it works. So here, I just add a semicolon and then my second argument. So the first question mark will be paired with the first argument, and the second question mark will be paired with the second argument. I'll say, okay, let's go ahead and see if this works. Let's go ahead and open our data viewer, script debugger data viewer, so that we can see. Let's clear this. Okay, will it work? Fingers crossed. And it did. So you'll notice that now in our query, we're saying where staff account name equals question mark, the account name that we're currently logged in as, and staff name equals second argument, which I knew the account name was Ryan, so I just typed in Ryan. Does that answer the argument question?
So for arguments, you have to pay attention to sequence, question mark.
Yes. Yeah, so if we look over here, we can see if they have any notes about the arguments. Okay, arguments. One or more expressions separated by semicolons that are evaluated and used as values for the dynamic parameters in the query statement. It doesn't say that it is. Okay, here it is. When you use multiple dynamic parameters in SQL query, the first question mark character is replaced by the first argument parameter, the second by the second, and so on. So yes, order is, that's the only way that we know which one to pair it up with. Good questions. Anything else? Any other questions there?
You can only use quotes around field names and table names because a space may appear in the field names? Question mark.
I'm not sure if a space will break it. That's a good question. So let's just let's try it out. So I just changed ID, staff ID to ID. I know the let's go ahead and then we'll change staff ID to space change. Will it work? Oh, let's clear this. I think it did. Yeah, so that did work. The space doesn't cause a problem there. You'll notice that though in some of these cases in the demo here, I'm not using an argument. So in this case, I'm saying where state equals California. The field and table names have double quotes while the query has single quotes. Now if we, I'll say run here, and now let's change that back to put double quotes on there and run again, it doesn't work. So we want those single quotes. Now, some resources. So we just talked about the ExecuteSQL that's helpful. Another thing that was really helpful just for me when I started using ExecuteSQL is Seed Code's SQL Explorer. And this was a award-winning app from when ExecuteSQL was released in FileMaker 12, and it's still useful. You can it walks you through setting up your app as an external data source and then being able to run these queries on your whatever app you want in the app, in this app. So another helpful thing is here W3 Schools. This is just information on the select statement. So in this case, the only statement that works for the ExecuteSQL function is a select statement. And so I reference this all the time when I'm trying to figure out how to write one of these things. So you'll notice here, select star from table name. That corresponds directly with select star from names. Now here it's not quoted. Do you think it'll work if we don't quote it? And no, it doesn't. So it's definitely helpful though. You get some of our options where ands and ors and nots and how to use them, the count, average, sum, ascending and descending, doing the groups and the sorting and such. Now, one thing we didn't really look at over here is that we have, so if I say run here, and I think let's go ahead back over here, and I think we removed we want this to be a return for the field name for the records. Run again. Now here we have ordered and sorted by ascending, but we can just as easily make this descending and say run, and now we've got a descending list. So you've got a lot of flexibility with how you have that presented there. And that isn't based on any documentation from FileMaker. That's where you'd want to reference something like the W3 schools or some other some SQL resource that talks about the select statement. And those were my resources there. Any questions before we move on to the next demo?
Yes. When are escape characters needed?
When are escape characters needed? So there's some. So one thing is that when you use this method with the custom functions for setting up your field names, it resolves those issues with having to having bad characters in your field names and such. So I haven't really run into it, but I know if you don't use something like this, then you can get something where like the underscore at the beginning of the field, that can mess things up. But if you put things in quotes and use those custom functions, then it doesn't end up being an issue. So haven't used escape characters, but I have just handled that through the way that the query is formatted. Any other questions?
Kind of. Ruben, normally in ExecuteSQL, you don't have to use quotes around field and table names. I'm trying to figure out why you need them now and why it doesn't work without quotes now.
Right. I think there is a way to get that to work without quotes, but I always use quotes just because it makes it work a lot more consistently. So and maybe our help would tell us something about that, but I'm not seeing anything. So if we look at this one, in their demo, they're actually not saying, they're not putting the quotes in there. So I'm not sure why it's not working without my quotes, but I've always used the quotes. Let me try that. It is really interesting though, when we look at here, they're not using quotes at all. Maybe I need to. Yeah, so I'm not sure what the problem is, but I do know it's a lot more friendly with the quotes. Any other questions?
I've read that in the field table name has space in it, and then you have to put quotes around it.
Okay, that could make sense. Yeah, and so if it has a space in it, that's going to cause a problem. But if you have quotes, that's why it worked when I took the space, added a space into the field name, but it still worked. That's because it was already in quotes. And I'm just more curious why the names isn't working right now when I remove the quotes. But I'm not going to debug that at this moment. Okay, so if there's if any other questions before we move on?
I think you're good.
Okay.
Moment.
So I'm curious to try this out and figure out why it's requiring names, or why it's requiring the quotes. But if you figure it out, let me know. Anyway, so let's go and see some implementations of this. The first thing I want to look at is FM starting point. And let's see, save. And we're going to look over here and look at our calendar. And now when we open the calendar, we've got a list of events for this week. And this list of events was generated from an SQL query. So if we go to the data viewer, if you have FM starting point open, or if you have FM starting point and you use the calendar, if you open up your data viewer right now, you will see a query in there. So here is the query that it's using. Select calendar underscore JSON from, this is the field name that has the calendar information formatted in the way that the full calendar can read. From, and then here's our table occurrence where the flag show on calendar is greater than 0. Now, if I say OK, and then our results for that, we can see those results right over here under info, events, and this is the result that it gave us. So this list of the events. Now let's go ahead and look at the script for that. And I believe it's called collect or something like that. And yep. And then here is our function that generates this list. So here you'll notice that in this case, we're using the field ref get field or field ref get TO to generate that. And this true is saying include quotes. So just to remind everybody what these custom functions look like. So I'm going to say TO and then field. So here we are referencing the field, we're referencing the a field, and then the first one we're getting the TO, the second one we're getting the field name, then we're saying whether we want it in quotes or not. In this case, we do want it in quotes. You'll notice we have it in quotes all along here because we want it to be we want it in quotes so it's not as fragile. And then we're using a number of if statements within the where to generate that query, because some of the fields, we're looking at global fields to tell how their person is filtering it. And here we're saying we're looking at between for the start and end date. So we want to see that we're using a between, which isn't something we looked at in our demo. Then we're saving it in a global variable so we can, just for debugging, then we're saying execute query. And if we look at this, we just say save all. And so every time we select refresh, it's running that script and saving a new list of the events in this list. So this is a little more complicated than the ones that we were looking at in the sandbox demo, but it shows you where you can go with this if you're trying to implement some kind of thing like the calendar. The reason you could use other forms of grabbing that list, maybe through a relationship or using go to related record and grabbing a list. In this case, it's just easy. The calendar was originally built as something that we wanted to be able to quickly and easily add to any app without having to use a given task or events table. So we use the query so we could just quickly change those field names to reference a new table that has the events or to add additional tables with additional events. And so that's a quick demo of how FM starting point. I think that's the only place FM starting point is using the ExecuteSQL function. Do you have any questions about it was just more of a briefly show how this is using a similar technique but different custom functions to accomplish the same result for a practical purpose. Do we have any questions about this?
I don't see any questions, everyone.
Now, in this case, we don't care about the order that it's in because we're not grouping anything. We just need a list of the data, and then the full calendar is deciding how to display it. So, and then my last demo is going to be we'll leave this open in case anyone comes back to it. The last demo is my chart demo. So this chart is actually these are actually FileMaker charts, and all the data is generated using ExecuteSQL, and each of these is one or two ExecuteSQL calls. So you'll see on the state we have California. We have labels for California, Florida, and New York. We've got numbers California, Florida, New York, and so there's two ExecuteSQL queries made, one for the list of states, one for the list of the invoices for each state. And the same is true for the staff and the types. And then a similar thing for this revenue by month. So if we look at here the fields where the ExecuteSQL results are going, and if I open up my script debugger, we'll go ahead and step into this script. And you'll notice the whole thing is just saying set field, and it's a select statement, select, 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 each of these. And so what is, when we originally did the chart demo, I went through and each one of these would be, so each one of these select statements would end up being an entire script if you were going to script the whole thing, and may or may not take longer. Probably would take longer, but it would depend on your data set and such. So this is one of the look at what we are doing to generate the query. So here we just have basically the query is set up, the format of the query. So here we're going to look for a sum, and these are just placeholders, the amount, invoices, and where placeholder, and this allows us to look at the query and just make sure it's what we're looking for. So we have a select, we're summarizing, we have to select where it's coming, the from, and the where, what's the limit. And then here we're using a substitute to insert the table and field names for each of those items. So the amount is the grand total of the invoice. The where is where grand total is greater than 0. You could probably remove the where and just keep going. And this is for a total. And then invoices is specifying the table. Let's go down to one that's a little more interesting. So here, this is just the totals that corresponds with these fields over here that are displayed. Second is the state chart. So here we're grabbing the state names. So select state, and here it references this one, the bill to state. Where, and the where is the grand total is greater than the 0, and select it from the invoices. And here we're grouping by state, and we're ordering by state. So that means that instead of giving us a list of all the invoices or all the states for the invoices, it's grouping and just giving a state a list of each state that is referenced. And so instead of getting, I don't know how many invoices we have in here, maybe it's nearly 600. Instead of getting a list of 600 states, we just get the 3 states that are referenced. And then the second item in there is followed by, here instead of summarizing, we're counting the ID constant, and that gives us the total number of orders that were for each state. We're saying group by, order by state. And then each of the subsequent calls is similar, but specific to what the staff or the type of order or the month, as in the charts here. So do we have any other questions about this format? So this is probably the format that I normally use when I'm using the ExecuteSQL. And the reason I used it here in this demo is I was just putting this together as fast as possible. And this was the way to generate that data. Yeah, so one thing that so in this case, I don't have any arguments just because it's simple. But this chart actually is based on a chart I did for a client for their dashboard. And one thing that they have so many records, they've got millions of records in their app, and you can't get a result more than I think 10 your results can't be more than 10,000 for ExecuteSQL. And so if it goes more than 10,000, you're just going to get an error. And so they have a lot of records, and processing through those records with SQL takes a long time. But what I'm looking for is the summarized data, which is not really something that you can generate. I want it to be static in here, so you can't do it without a whole bunch of loops in a script that would take a long time anyway. So in their case, I generate the query locally so I can see what it is, and then I use perform script on server to run the query, and then I return the result as the script result back to myself to and then set the field with whatever those summarized records are. And that makes it a lot faster than running it locally on the machine. So a lot of ways that we can use ExecuteSQL. It is a tool. You got to remember it's not the answer for all of your problems, and sometimes there's other ways that you need to do something that's faster. And so, for example, there's the similar method to I'm working on a similar project to the calendar, where we're trying to generate a list of record and field information for an API, but the data is just too big for ExecuteSQL to handle. So in that case, I'm using a go-to related record and using a list summary field to generate the data. And so it's not always the answer for all the problems, but it's good to know how it works and where it's useful.
I have a script that has about 50 or so ExecuteSQL statements in it that gets counts, and that's it. It's only run when someone clicks a button, but it runs really fast for me.
Yeah, so that's a good use case for it. If it runs fast, then you know it's giving you the data you need, and it's not breaking all the time. And that's definitely a good spot to use it.
Oh, Stu has a question. The 10,000 limit is for results and not records? If correct, is there a limit on records or just RAM or patience limits?
That's a good question. So let's go ahead and let's find out. How much time do we have? We got 3 minutes. Okay. So let's go ahead and go to names. And I'm just going to create a new record here, because I don't think the 10,000 limit is specified in the documentation, which is a little frustrating. Let's just look over here. Yeah, I don't think that's specified. So let's go ahead and we will go to a new script, and we'll say new record, so loop. We'll say exit loop if get found count is greater than or equal to 9,999. Okay, we'll say duplicate so that we actually get record data. Let's go ahead to names, and let's see how fast this takes. This might take a minute. Save all. We'll open the script debugger, see where we're at. Oh, wow, this might take a while. Okay, so here we are. And so here we're going to say run. So here we got the names. And here, let's go to the one of these that summarizes it. We want to summarize it with the names. I thought we had one that we summarized it with the. I'm just going to take where the California is. Okay, so this still, so you'll notice I removed California. It's taking longer to run now. The where. Just thinking about this. So if you have too many records, it will start beach balling there. So here it finally ran. And let's go ahead and see. We'll go back to the first one, select names. And let's see what happens when we create one more record. So we got the 10,000. Does it still work? Let's do one more, 10,001. And it looks like it still works. So maybe I'm wrong about the limit. I thought there was a limit on how many records we could do there. But it doesn't look like the number. If there's a limit, it doesn't look like the limit's 10,000. Because we are running and 10,000 did not cause it to break. So that's as long as it doesn't work too slow for you, it's good to use. Any final questions before we go?
No, I don't think so. I think we're good.
All right. Well, thank you for joining today. And hopefully this has piqued your interest with ExecuteSQL function. And we hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, everyone, thank you very much for coming. Seriously, thank you so much, Calvin, for doing this. We greatly appreciate it. Look forward to having you back on the show soon.
Got a report of an individual up here who may be a FileMaker license. Well, it's potentially expired. Look at the back of that car right there. Looks like the FileMaker license has expired. Sir, I need you to step out of the vehicle. Sir, step out of the vehicle. Sir!